So I've been using the iPhone 13 mini for about 6 months now after downgrading from the iPhone 14 Pro. It's wild, I know, but I definitely have my reasons, and the iPhone 15 Pro came out today. Now getting this in hand, my goal honestly is to find out if it's worth keeping over my favorite device of all time, which is the iPhone 13 mini. Now as I go through my first impressions today, I'll try not to compare it too much to last year's model since I imagine most of you aren't really upgrading from last year's version. Depending on who you are though, either a whole lot has changed or not so much depending on what device you have. Whether it's worth it, hopefully I can help you figure that out. But what hasn't really changed over the last couple years is what's inside the box, and even today that still holds the same. In here though, we do of course have the iPhone 15 Pro and this braided white Type-C cable. For myself, I did end up going for the black titanium with 256 gigs of storage. Not so sure if that's enough, but we'll see. And getting this in hand, I didn't quite realize titanium was actually going to be this much lighter. On paper, sure, it's only like 10% difference, but it's still definitely noticeable. I'll put the Freedom units here on screen, but it does weigh about 187 grams, whereas the 14 Pro is 206 grams, and my 13 mini is 141. By comparison though, a bag of milk is about 967 grams. And the jump from the 13 to the 14 Pro is actually bigger than that from the 13 to the 15 Pro when it comes down to weight at least. And with this year's device, there are some pretty decent upgrades which I will talk about shortly, but none of that really matters if I can't get around the increase in device size. Getting this in hand though, I can definitely say it's a fine mix of what I love about the 14 series and the older, more rounded iPhones. Majorly, it's just more comfortable to hold in hand. I'm definitely stoked I can still stand my device up upright on a hard surface, not that that really has any practical usage whatsoever. The bezels around the display are thinner as well, and while it's definitely a welcomed adjustment, it's not the most noticeable, even compared to my 13 mini. And depending on what you place more value in, the two biggest design changes this year are swapping from the Lightning port to USB-C, alongside changing the physical mute switch to the action button. Between those two changes though, I definitely find the Type-C port quite a bit more useful in my use case, although that's not for charging. I'll still leave that to MagSafe. And I can say the action button is pretty sweet to be able to customize as well, but as a creator, the Type-C port for me will actually bring a whole new level of utility to my content creation workflow, especially when I'm filming directly to an external drive. Overall, I really enjoy the direction they went in terms of design and aesthetic. My dream phone would have all of these new features and the design in a smaller form factor, although I don't think that'll really ever happen. And when it comes down to the camera, above all else, I find this to be the most impressive change with the iPhone 15 Pro, and I do want to touch on that in a second, but I do want to give a huge thanks to UPDF for sponsoring today's video. With all of the upgrades iPhone receives year over year, one of the things they haven't received yet is a good app for PDFs. UPDF does help bridge that gap with what's missing by giving you a robust PDF editor across all of your devices and operating systems, all while being enhanced with ChatGPT tools. With one license, you can access all of your files across devices and platforms, allowing you to view, edit, annotate, and even sign your PDFs on Mac or PC. You can easily take it with you on the go as well to get that last moment signature. Removing or adding pages is only a few clicks away, and being able to edit PDFs turn this app from an A to an A+. Summarize, translate, or explain PDFs with UPDF, and check out the link down below to save 63% off UPDF, and thanks again to UPDF for sponsoring today's video. But talking about the camera, as somebody who started this entire YouTube channel by filming on iPhones, it's absolutely wild to see how well they've progressed in just a few years. Previously, I did swap to an actual camera as opposed to the iPhone, as I felt like I'd slowly grown out of the limitations of my iPhone. Not that they're bad in any way. The challenges with iPhone cameras for me were the lack of performance when it comes to low light situations, the transfer speeds for ProRes footage over Lightning or AirDrop, and the lack of manual controls. And while not all of that has changed with the 15 Pro, there are some great trade-offs here. Will it be better than my actual camera? Probably not, but I'm not opposed to swapping back to an iPhone just for the simplicity and minimalistic factor. Fun fact though, despite having this camera, I actually still shoot all my thumbnails with an iPhone. But for the 15 Pro, for me, it comes down to being able to shoot directly to an SSD enclosure, which I can then plug directly into my Mac for editing. And I'm by no means a professional, but I do place a high amount of value in tangible features like that. The minor improvements to the camera, like having a slightly larger sensor and whatnot, is nice, but really it's not that big a deal. 4K footage on my 13 mini was nice. The 4K on my 14 Pro was nice, and obviously on the 15 Pro it's definitely nice. Now though, I can shoot in ProRAW Apple Log without really worrying about my storage, which is pretty sweet. Either way, it's nice to experiment swapping back from my camera to an iPhone again, and I'll definitely have more thoughts about the camera when it comes down to my full review. Although I will say I'm pretty stoked to have this action button finally. I don't yet know what I'll really be using this for, meaning in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not all that useful yet. All I know is that 90% of the time I don't have my ringer on anyways, and the other 10% of the time I'm rolling with the Bluey theme song. Shout out to all the parents out there. With that though, I think I'll either swap this to quick launch my camera or set a shortcut to control the lights in my office. Since it's practically fully customizable through shortcuts as well, this opens up a whole new level of use. And while it's not specific to the iPhone 15 Pro, iOS 17 brings some pretty cool new features. For myself, they're not overly groundbreaking by any means, but they're still useful either way. Namely, standby mode I think is my favorite since I do use this every day. It's just a practical and aesthetic way to add some utility to your space. And then there's small things like the grocery list and reminders fully segregating departments, which is actually invaluable. Since I turned 31 tomorrow, I'm practically a senior citizen, which is probably why this makes me so excited. As well as setting multiple timers finally comes to the native clock app, maybe 10 years late if I'm being honest, but it's there and I really dig this when I'm cooking. There's also the other cute features like animated cover arts in Apple Music, transcribed voicemails, or being able to read voice messages. Now the iPhone 14 Pro did have 120Hz, and while I'm a lover of all things high refresh, it wasn't quite enough to stop me from going to the 13 mini. Still, it's definitely a welcome feature on the 15, and they do have some slightly thinned bezels this year. For myself, really, the display just needs good brightness. It actually has to look good and be hella responsive. In this case, the iPhone 15 Pro definitely delivers on that front. For most people too, this is definitely the right display size, although for myself, I'm starting to already miss the smaller size of the 13 mini. And while the iPhones haven't really ever felt slow or behind in performance at all, this device definitely keeps that same great performance. I don't throw down as long gaming sessions on my iPhone like I used to, although that might change this year with the new releases. In reality, I'm not sure if I'll be using all that new power that the A17 chip has. Either way, it's nice to have. But for this device, for sure, I'm buying into the features that I know I'll be getting huge value out of. But with all the new features combined with the 15 Pro, I'm not sure if it's enough to keep me from going back to my iPhone 13 mini. Either way, this really is an incredible device, having only used it less than 8 hours. And what I can say is for anybody upgrading from an older device, maybe the 13 and before, this is definitely a great upgrade. But if you are coming from last year's model, obviously not a lot has changed and you definitely know that. You might be looking for a reason to upgrade to the 15 Pro. You don't really need to justify it to anybody but yourself. Either way, I'm hoping to have a full review of the iPhone 15 Pro out within the week. I appreciate you all watching till the end. Till next time.